Achilles saw that Hector's body was completely covered by the fine bronze armor he had taken from the great Patroclus when he killed him, except for an opening at the gullet where the collarbones lead over from the shoulders to the neck, the easiest place to kill a man. As Hector charged him, Prince Achilles drove at this spot with his lance, and the point went right through the tender flesh of Hector's neck, though the heavy bronze head did not cut his windpipe, and left him able to address his conqueror. Hector came down in the dust, and the great Achilles triumphed over him. "Hector," he said, "no doubt you fancied as you stripped Patroclus that you would be safe. You never thought of me. I was too far away. You were a fool. Down by the hollow ships there was a man far better than Patroclus in reserve, the man who has brought you low. So now the dogs and birds of prey are going to maul and mangle you, while the Achaeans hold Patroclus' funeral." "I beseech you," said Hector, of the glittering helmet in a failing voice, "by your knees, by your own life, and by your parents', not to throw my body to the dogs at the Achaean ships, but to take a ransom for me. My father and my lady mother will pay you bronze and gold in plenty. Give up my body to be taken home, so that the Trojans and their wives may honor me in death with the ritual of fire." The swift Achilles scowled at him. "You cur," he said, "don't talk to me of knees, or name my parents in your prayers. I only wish that I can summon up the appetite to carve and eat you raw myself for what you have done to me. But this at least is certain, that nobody is going to keep the dogs from you, not even if the Trojans bring here and weigh out a ransom 10 or 20 times your worth, and promise more besides, not if Dardanian Priam tells them to pay your weight in gold. Not even shall your lady mother lay you on a bier to mourn the son she bore, but the dogs and birds of prey shall eat you up." Homer's The Iliad. So this is a great book. This is your Sunday Penguin for today. And it was easy to choose because I'm up here at the rustic Vaughan Lodge, and right now, this is the only Penguin classic up here, but it's a good one. One of the best, in fact. Homer actually was the first author who was in Penguin Classics. The Odyssey was, I believe, the very first Penguin Classics, and it was translated by the man who translated this volume, the Iliad, E.V. Rue. And this is his version of the Iliad. And it's a really good version, actually. This is a prose version. And if you've never read this before, I know there are, I don't know how many English translations of the Iliad there are by now. It seems like there's a new one coming out every couple years or so. But this one, it's an old one, but it's actually really good, especially if you've never read it before, or if you're just not used to reading epic poems. This actually is a pretty good translation. It reads kind of like a novel, actually, yet it's a pretty faithful translation of the original, so I understand. I don't myself read ancient Greek. But yeah, this has always been one of my favorite versions. I've read quite a few, and this has always been one of my favorites, just because it's pretty clear. It's an easier version to read than a lot of them, and it was the first one I read. So yeah, maybe that has something to do with it as well. But I like this version of the Iliad, and this is written by Homer. Modern scholarship now places him somewhere in Ionia in about 700 BC. We don't know much about Homer. We don't know if the Iliad and the Odyssey were even written by the same person. But tradition holds Homer as the author of both the Iliad and the Odyssey. But like I said, we don't know much of anything about Homer himself. you'll hear lots of theories, and there are some people that hold pretty strong theories regarding Homer, but really, facts are not there to back up those theories, unfortunately. If only we had more facts about Homer. What we do know is that the Iliad was an epic poem that was based on a lot of other poems, a long tradition that stretched back probably to the Mycenaean age. Certainly, the warfare in this volume harkens back to an older time than when it was written, or first composed and put down in this form. It was an oral poem, we believe, and it seems like, well, geez, that's a pretty long poem to memorize. But if you're an oral poet, you can do it. You can memorize something a lot longer than this, especially if you use the tricks of the trade, which is you, as a poet, Homer probably wouldn't have read this line for line exactly every time, but he kept the major beats in there. And we know this from how other oral poets in the modern ages have done oral poetry. So the story itself is about the anger of Achilles. Agamemnon has led an army to the gates of Troy. His brother's wife, his brother Menelaus, her wife Helen, has been taken by Paris to Troy, and they're trying to get her back. So they brought a whole army for this. Seems like overkill, but that's what they did. Of course, there were other reasons why they attacked Troy. For all the riches they can get from Troy is probably the real reason, but Helen was a pretty good excuse. And this is the story of the anger of Achilles, because Achilles gets angered right away when Agamemnon takes his prize, which is a woman that was enslaved. What would happen in these days? Agamemnon's army were really just a bunch of raiders. You know, they would raid, they would rape and pillage, literally, and they would take women as slaves, as property. In the ancient world, slavery was everywhere. It was just really common. So if you were on the losing side of an army and you survived, pretty good chance you're going to end up a slave. And if you're a woman of a town that got sacked, you could end up a slave or worse. Tough times back in these days. So yeah, really, they're just glorified raiders, these guys. And they want to raid Troy. So a woman that was taken prisoner, as property, as a slave, Agamemnon took her from Achilles, and that pisses Achilles off. So Achilles goes and sulks by his ship and doesn't take part in the fighting until his best friend Patroclus is killed by Hector. And as you see from the part that I read, Achilles goes and gets revenge. And Achilles is pretty much the greatest fighter of this time. This guy was a killing machine. And one of the things that I was so struck by when I first read this, and I was probably 21 or 22 when I first really read the whole thing, was just how incredibly violent it is. There are scenes of just horrific violence and gore in this. I almost read a passage, but it was just like, I'm like, man, that's too much if you're just clicking around on BookTube. You shouldn't have to be exposed to that unless you're prepared. So if you do read this book, man, be prepared, because some of the violence in this book is just horrific and vividly described. He spares no expense in vividly describing the violence in this story. And it's a great story. And it's really immediate. I mean, when you read this, the intervening centuries just sort of drift away. And all the characters in this story are really human, you know, despite the different times that they lived in, and the fact that most of these guys are, you know, awful raiders who do terrible things. You can relate to these people very often on an emotional level. And the gods are involved in this story. You see Zeus and all the rest of the Olympic gods taking part in the fight of the war against Troy. And we get to see Odysseus and some other characters famous from Greek plays and mythology. And it's just fascinating. It's a fascinating book on multiple levels. You can appreciate this book as a work of art because it is a great work of art. You can appreciate it as just a great story because it really is a vivid description of war. The war that takes place here actually predates when this was written down. And you can tell just by the way they fight, a lot of one-on-one fights between champions. Yeah, it's great. Is it a war story? Is it an anti-war story? Does it glorify war? All those things, really. Yeah, it's just an incredible work. A lot of you, I'm sure, have probably read this, but if you have not, if you've missed out on reading this until now, man, I really recommend it. This is so worth your time. I would recommend this and the Odyssey both. I think the Odyssey has always been preferred over the Iliad, maybe until recently. But the Iliad is probably the better story. It's probably the better book. So definitely a great one to read. So that was your Sunday Penguin for the day. When I talk to you again, I should be back at stately Vaughan Manor. So I will see you then. Thanks, guys.